Hi and welcome to Literary Hype. I am Stephanie, your literary hype woman, and today's author conversation is for the historical fiction fans. I'm talking to K.D. Alden about her new book, Lady Codebreaker, which, as the title implies, is about a lady codebreaker. This is based on a real woman. Some things are changed, but it is based on a real woman in World War I, World War II, Prohibition. She did a lot in the code-breaking space, and this is a really fascinating book, so you definitely want to check this out. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with K.D. Alden. Welcome to Literary Hype. It's very exciting to have you on to talk about your new book, Lady Codebreaker. So I really am excited to talk about this book. So for those who haven't seen it yet, give us a little introduction to what Lady Codebreaker is all about.
So Lady Codebreaker is it's based on the true story of Elizabeth Smith Friedman, she was basically a girl off an Indiana farm who wanted a life outside of the ordinary. And she was one of the first female codebreakers to work for the US government. And she caught saboteurs during World War I. She caught dangerous smugglers during Prohibition, and she caught Nazi spies during World War II. She had no math background. She was an English major, I think, like a lot of us readers or writers. And she was just this 5'3" dynamo, and she was just incredible.
How did you first come across her story?
I first came across her on a PBS special called The Codebreaker. And I just sat there with my mouth hanging open. And I thought, I've got to write about this woman. She's incredible. It had never crossed my mind to write about a codebreaker, although I do have a thing for spies. And I didn't consider some of the perils about writing about a codebreaker, meaning I would actually have to show her doing that on the page, which turned out to be challenging, to say the least, for me. Some people have brains that work like that. I was not blessed with one.
And yeah. I was going to ask about that because there are chunks where you're showing how the code works. What was it like for you to figure out how to express that and how to make it understandable for a reader who may not know anything about code breaking?
I literally almost said, there's no way I can write this book. I could process the basics, but I really had no idea how to show this person who really worked behind the scenes all the time. I was afraid the book would be deathly boring if I couldn't show her in action, because watching someone with a pencil just scratch away at a worksheet and move letters around is, it's about as exciting as watching paint dry. And so the hardest part for me was to convey some of the stakes that were really high. I mean, the first saboteur she caught was this guy behind the Black Tom explosions in Jersey City. I mean, blew up, I want to say, $20 million of munitions, that were bound for Great Britain. And in the process killed 3 people and a baby. That scratching with the pencil, it was crucial. How was I going to make that exciting on the page? And how was I going to keep her in the background, but at the same time keep her in the foreground because it was her story? So it was really kind of brain bending.
And I'm sure making it more brain bending is that this is a multiple timeline story.
Yeah, if we're going to be honest, this is, to me anyway, it's almost a 5-plot story, because it spans 40 years. It spans, from World War I to 1958 is when those sort of present scenes take place that tie the whole thing together. And I'm not a pantser, but plotting is really hard for me. I realized the book was going to have to be written in ideally 3 sections. And then my editor and I went back and forth about whether to cut that first section, which occurs at Riverbank, which was this sort of insane think tank type of place where she got her start at Codebreaker. And my editor said, we really don't need this. And I thought, I can't lose that part. I really can't lose that part. Because it's so much fun, and she was literally kidnapped to this place to work. And so my stubbornness in the face of my editor's very good advice created a situation where I had to create four plots, and each of them sort of had to have their separate rising action and then a turning point that would take us into the second part of the story. At times it was really messy. At times I didn't know what I was doing. At the same time, the 1958 sort of present day plot helped me a lot in guiding where the story was going, if that makes any sense at all. So it's like author brain going, blah,
So, and that happens, like trying to keep track of all those plots when you're trying to write is so complicated, especially when you're basing it on real events and trying to make sure that you're trying to keep it realistic to what was going on. And you do a pretty lengthy author's note breaking down what you kept as real and what you fictionalized. How did you approach deciding what maybe needed a little bit of fudging?
They couldn't all take center stage. And honestly, you could write a novel about so many of the individual characters. But I had to cut some of them back, in service to Elizabeth's story, or as she's renamed, Grace's story. Remember that this was her story. A lot of historical authors they'll write from three people's points of view. And for this story, I felt it was so complicated, the psychology, everything she was dealing with at home. I wanted to go really deep point of view with her.
And going along with the multiple plot lines, what was it that made you decide to start this novel with the, for lack of a better word, raid on Grace's library?
So that was very deliberate. I think in the author's notes, I talk about how it took me a long time to find the heart of this story, because there was a lot of code breaking, there was a lot of action, there's world wars, there's smuggling, there's prohibition. But where was the true heart of the story? And it is a love story between Elizabeth, or Grace, and her husband, a love story that has an arc of its own. And as authors, we're taught to examine what is the most important thing to your character. What is that? And to the Friedmans or the Feldmans in the book, it was their library. And the NSA really did come to take some of those books away. And I thought, what must that have done to them? That must have been horrifying and invasive of their privacy, and putting their trustworthiness into question. And I just thought it would be really, really upsetting. Any of us who love books in this house will in danger of collapsing from all the books in it. What would you do if these two government guys came and said, we're going to take away all your mystery thrillers? Yeah,
they came from my sign books. It would be some problems.
Yeah. So I started with that very deliberately, but it was something that actually happened.
And a story like this involves a lot of research. What was your process like in gathering all the information that you needed to tell this story?
It's interesting that you use the word process, because there was no process. I would come across a research book and I would look at its bibliography, or I would read about someone and I would immediately order, another 5 books. And my husband was like, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know, but I'm having fun, and I would just, I kept reading. I read while I was writing. I read while I was plotting. I would just make all these discoveries and um, just cool, interesting sidebars, and I loved it. And to my great shock, I absolutely loved being buried in all these books, which I still have. And he wants me to get rid of them, and I'm like, no, no, I love this time period. No.
They could come in handy for a future novel. You never know.
Exactly.
And in your like author's note towards the back of the book, you mentioned that one of the first book you got on code breaking, you actually threw and started screaming.
Okay, I didn't throw it. I have too much respect for books. But it was David Kahn's The Codebreakers, which, if you've ever seen it, it's literally like 5 inches thick. And I was terrified of it. I didn't even want to open it because my brain, math was not a strong subject for me. In fact, the retired Air Force colonel who tried to teach me algebra really thought I was dumb as a box of rocks because my brain just doesn't work that way. And poor David Kahn, I don't mean to malign him in any way, because it's actually a great book. It's a really readable book, and I shouldn't have been scared of it, but it was just like, whoa, what? How am I going to chew through that? And what am I going to do with it?
Big books can be entirely intimidating. Like the Sarah J. Maas ones, those are like 1,000 pages, and
Yeah.
I'm scared of them too. So I understand this feeling. You had a little comment in this book that really made me think a little bit, was the English language is gibberish if you don't understand the alphabet, or something along those lines is what you wrote. Talk about how words can be like that. Like it's a language to whoever understands it. So these codes can be a language too.
What we're dealing with are, whether they're letters or numbers or the English alphabet or the Cyrillic alphabet, they are just little scratches on a page. They're just black marks, and the way they're interpreted is something that you can learn. You can be taught, and they come in patterns, and they have friends. Like in the English language, TH and E are they're buddies. V, you see it all the time. A likes to hang out by itself. But you know what I'm saying? And that is sort of how Elizabeth or Grace was taught, to look at codes. One of the insights that I got when I was writing Robert's character, especially in the 1958 sequences, comes from my mom dying of early Alzheimer's. And it was like a week after my 24th birthday that she died. But she was a professor, and she spoke 5 languages, and she was brilliant. She wrote literary criticism, which meant, the last thing on earth. I mean, to become an author was really, really scary, being raised by a literary critic. But one day I came downstairs and I found my mom with a book, and she's reading like this, upside down. And it just boggled my mind, because this was something that she obviously knew she enjoyed doing. And she's looking at those black marks, those squiggles that could have been in Cyrillic or whatever. And she's trying to interpret them, and they're not making any sense to her. Not only because the book is upside down, but because she just wasn't at a place where she had the mental capacity to process those words. So when I was writing about Robert and his, I don't want to do too many spoilers here, but he was so overworked and exhausted by his government code breaking job. Let's just say he really slows down and has problems working and has problems focusing and concentrating. And I know this is a really circuitous way to answer your question. But yeah, when those squiggles lose meaning, I just think it would be terrifying. Readers and writers get so much pleasure out of looking at those squiggles and the interpretation of them.
And you're touching a little bit on Robert, and that was one of the first things, like, because we start in 58 with things a little off at that point. Talk about crafting this romance through the decades, and how, like, especially in the 58 timeline, like, they're so sweet, even though they're going through all these challenges. Like, talk a little bit about crafting a romance in amongst all these big historical world events.
That scene, that 1958 scene, really rolled out almost, it hasn't changed much since I wrote it. So it sort of came by instinct, and it came from caretaking someone who was becoming an invalid. Yeah, the only misunderstanding I had with both my editor and my agent is when Robert comes down the stairs with no pants on. I hadn't made it clear that he was actually in pajamas. So they were like, no, you have to put pants on this poor man. And I'm like, I never meant not to. But that was just one of the funny things that came out in the editing process.
And that's why we have editors, to catch the things that
Thank God.
Come off in a different perspective.
Yeah. But their love, their marriage, it had an arc, and that I stayed pretty much true to that. She did not want to get married. She did not want to be sort of owned by anyone. And she liked him very much. And she knew she would probably not find a better man, but she wasn't in love with him when they got married. And then over the years, as I think you can tell from the book, she really does fall hard for him and ends up becoming his protector in the end, whereas he starts by being hers. So it kind of chokes me up still, that part of the story.
Sweet story for them in amongst all this chaos that they're going through. And another little part that stood out to me was the Shakespeare versus Sir Francis Bacon. Is that a real theory? Because I'd never heard of this before.
Yeah, that was a real theory. That is what Elizabeth or Grace was brought to Riverbank to help with. And the theory was that Sir Francis Bacon actually wrote all of Shakespeare's works, and that there was a bilateral code hidden in the actual text, in one of the folios, because some of the letters were fat and some of them were thin. And so this woman, this scholar, Mrs. Gallup, was set to prove that Shakespeare was not really the author of his own plays, his own work. And yeah, this was a real theory, and they were hell-bent on proving it. And I did fudge a little bit about how Elizabeth was taken off of that project. Mrs. Gallup didn't actually fire her. It's just that they had this chance to enter the code breaking world, and she was a smart cookie, and so she was pulled off of that project to work on code breaking, and she was like, what? But yeah, in the book I have her, she's fired, and then she's put on that project.
In the back of the book, there's some reader discussion questions. Did you help create those questions? Are you involved in that process at all?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I think I wrote all of them.
So how did you go about deciding what was important for fellow readers to focus on when they get together to talk about this book?
I thought about how she changes. At the beginning of the book, she's very by the book. She's doesn't break any rules. She's just not a rule breaker. By the end of the book, she's breaking some rules. And wanted to know what readers thought about that. And I wanted to know what they thought about her marrying a man and knowing that she didn't love him in the right way, and him knowing that. I wanted to know if that would bother anyone, or whether they would understand, that back in 1917, 1918, if you were a certain age and unmarried, you were you're on the shelf. You were set up to be a spinster. And whether it's okay to marry for friendship and not love. What do people think about prohibition? Was it a stupid law? I mean, what if you were unable to talk to your husband about what you did for a living? I mean, there are plenty of times my husband comes in and sees me staring at the wall, and he knows that I'm just not here. I'm like in the White House in 1933, or I just, but he's finally learned after all these years that yes, lying flat on my back on the bed, staring at the ceiling or reading actually qualifies as work. That I'm thinking or I'm researching, even though it looks like I'm being a lazy bum.
Exactly. Like, the thought process is such a big part of the writing process. And a lot of people are like, oh, you're being lazy. And it's like, no, you have to think before you write.
Yeah, you do. And if you do start writing without thinking, you end up having to murder off characters, because I have 3 dead bodies from this manuscript, because I didn't know where or how to start. And then when I did, I have Elizabeth in the classroom. This is not the 1958 timeline. That's totally different, but that was written separately. I have her in the classroom because she was a teacher for a while, and she takes pity on a pregnant 14-year-old student, and who stows away on the train when Elizabeth leaves Indiana. And I had this whole subplot with this girl and her baby, and yeah, we had to throw him back off the train. They weren't moving the plot forward, and I felt awful, because you sort of get attached to your imaginary friends. But
And you've written more than 25 novels so far, I think is the number I saw.
so actually Lady Codebreaker is number 29, but
29.
I have had 4 pen names. So
Exactly. And that's what I was getting to, is because I looked it up and I was like, wait, it says there's 20, but there's only 2
yes,
showing on Goodreads, and then multiple pen names. So what made you decide to switch names with different genres as you're writing?
I felt myself moving more in the direction of women's fiction. And I started off writing romantic comedy, and I loved it, and I don't regret it at all. I learned so much about writing and structure and plot and character, and I absolutely loved it. But I felt myself wanting to write something a little bit different, and so I took a turn writing young adults by adventure novels under one name, and then getting together with a friend to write 3 rom-coms that were different. They were sort of small town rom-coms, and those came out smack in the middle of, they all came out in 2020. Nobody was going to bookstores in 2020. Nobody was going, Walmart made a huge buy, but nobody was going to Walmart. We were all at home in our masks. And but I felt like it was a sign. And I had been pulled towards women's fiction for a while. And I literally stumbled across, actually someone threw me the idea for A Mother's Promise. A friend of mine had come across the idea, and he was contracted up to the eyeballs, and he said, I came across this great idea, but I don't have time to write it. And I thought of you, and I thought, really? And so there was an NPR podcast, Hidden Brain, and I said, okay, Michael, thanks. And I, got on my treadmill and I'm listening to the podcast, and it was on Carrie Buck and Buck versus Bell, which is a 1927 Supreme Court case that essentially gave the government the right to sterilize people it did not want reproducing. And as I was on the treadmill listening to this, I heard her voice, and there's just something weird that happened. I mean, not only did the story make me furious, I'll get a little bit more personal here. I had gone through IVF myself, and it was unsuccessful, and I don't want to go into a lot about that. But for me, hearing this woman and her sister who tried, to have her sister tried to have children for decades and didn't realize that she had been sterilized and not even told about it. And I just got furious. And that one, I'm normally a much more disciplined plotter. I start with 10 plot points and 3-act structure and, turning points and everything. And I literally jumped off the treadmill and threw up in my laptop and started writing chapter 1, which stayed pretty much the same until it was published. And I had to write the book on spec because it was so different, from the other material I'd written. And I didn't care. I just thought, I'm writing this book. I'm writing this book because I have to write this book. That's how I stumbled into writing historical fiction. And yet I feel after all these years, like I'm finally wearing the right writer pants. It fits. And I never imagined that I would love doing the research so much, that I would love uncovering all these amazing people and trying to breathe life back into them on the page and introduce them again to modern readers. And I just absolutely love it.
So is historical fiction your favorite genre to write in now?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It's been a long kind of circuitous route getting here, but I love it. I love reading it. I love researching it. I love writing it.
What do you wish you knew about writing back when you first started that you know now after 29 books?
So many things. I wish I had understood plotting better. I wish I'd understood the market better. I wish I'd understood the kind of the ups and downs of the writing career. You can have one book that that does really well, and then you can have another one that's just is a dud, and your sales numbers are going to follow you. Just things like that. I wish I had been more savvy. I wish I had known marketing better, which is still not my forte. I wouldn't change anything, honestly. Every writer has his or her own journey, and mine has been kind of wild in a lot of ways and full of a lot of happy accidents. So it's all good. I'm just happy to be able to do what I love.
I don't know of many authors that enjoy the marketing side of it. They just want to write the books and y'all find it. Figure it out.
That's why we thank God for people like you.
Aw.
LiteraryHypeWoman, and it still makes me laugh. Did you really walk with like a dozen books on the top of your head?
Oh, my record is 28 down an escalator.
28 down an escalator?
I was
Do you have video?
No, it was just me. I work at a bookstore, so I was in the fourth
it.
story at that point, and it was like when I started, I couldn't do one, and I was like, "We're gonna keep going." And my boss was like, "You cannot do more than can fit in your arm." So I got really good at walking and then dropping them all into my arm and catching them and putting them away.
I love it.
So what are you working on next?
I'm trying to figure out the psychology of the character that I want to write next. I have sort of a blob of a synopsis. I have no chapters yet, and I'm thinking about combining her with another character. They're both spies, American spies during World War II, who also just kind of fell into it. And I don't want to jinx it by talking about it too much. I think if I hadn't become an author, I might have studied psychology, because it's so interesting to me what makes people tick, and why they do the things they do, or what they're searching for in life, in all the wrong ways.
Is there anything else you want to talk about that I might have missed?
I guess I just want to say, and I probably said it in the book, but this honestly was the toughest book of my career. And every book is hard. Every book has its own set of problems, but it's also been my favorite book, just in terms of putting this giant jigsaw puzzle together and trying to do justice to Elizabeth Smith Friedman, or Grace Feldman, in the book. I hope if she's up there that she'll forgive some of the liberties I took with her character, and but I hope she would like the book. And I hope readers will too. I mean, without readers, authors would not have jobs.
It's true.
Yeah.
And since this is Literary Hype, what books are you hyped about right now?
I just read Kate Thompson's the Wartime Book Club, and it's wonderful, and just a whole different perspective on World War II. I love anything by Natasha Lester, Kate Quinn, Kate Morton, Beatrice Williams. Those are, all historical people. And then historical mysteries, I love Alyssa Maxwell. And I'm actually getting a sneak peek at a Vanessa Kelly manuscript right now, and it's wonderful as well. I love just the wittiness and the, kind of just the stylized environment and everything. Wow. Kristen Hanna, Anthony Doerr.
Very historical fiction.
So you got the introvert talking and now, I won't shut up.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to Literary Hype about your new book, Lady Codebreaker.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's really been a pleasure. And I have subscribed.
Yay! Thanks to KD for spending some time with me and talking about her book, Lady Codebreaker. If you want to get a hold of this or her other ones that she mentioned, the links to do so are down in the description for you, as well as where to find her on Instagram. And by the way, those links, if you use those, it helps support the channel, so highly recommend. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the Literary Hype channel so you can stay up to date with all the author conversations and shenanigans coming your way. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day.